you used to, before Apollo, you were running crypto and blockchain at JP Morgan. Why does this, and I think since DeFi summer, you started to get pretty excited about moving some of this stuff on chain. Why does this matter?
Yeah, I mean, I would say tokenization of real world assets has been my life's work at this point. I've been working at it for a decade, as mentioned. Been at Apollo here for 3 years, but previously spent almost a decade at JP Morgan building out their blockchain program, and like quite proud of the work that I did there. Tokenized treasuries, tokenized dollars. I think to date, some of the systems that I've created, like intraday repo, have tokenized over $2 trillion on permissioned Ethereum blockchain networks. And so, have spent a lot of time, kind of thinking about the intersection of CeFi and DeFi, if you will. I think the case for tokenization is rooted in like how we fundamentally modernize the creation, the distribution, and the management of assets. I think, overall, like the way that it started in 2016, 2017 was that, tokenization most obviously would bring automation and, the reduction of reconciliation and the reduction of cost to the administration of assets. Like that was sort of the starting point for how like a lot of the TradFi institutions, justified like their journey in blockchain, if you will. But I think over time, what we've learned in the past few years of doing tokenization is that the unlock is so much more. It's so much more than the cost savings. I mean, the cost savings, the automation, the reduction of the reconciliation, like it's table stakes, if you will. And by the way, it's important table stakes because, what you're talking about is for an institution that adopts tokenization, you have the killer cost base in that your cost base is like near zero scale compared to the operations of significant financial institutions that have thousands of people working in operations and finance, reconciliating, doing low value tasks, if you will. However, overall, tokenization, I think brings together like really important things like multi-asset interoperability. And you started mentioning it when we're talking about sort of the beginnings of stable coins and the broad adoption that we have there, sort of the drift towards like treasury tokens and money market tokens that, pioneers like BlackRock and Securitize and others have driven. Now, kind of adding another layer to the cake with Apollo's private credit fund, and, we'll see what's next. But essentially what we're doing is that we are creating multi-asset interoperability, allowing different assets to be programmable together on the same operating system. And that's really powerful, right? Because especially as someone who spent like a decade in like sort of the trenches, like the underbelly of TradFi operations, what you learn is that different assets live in different siloed systems. They don't interact. Well, first of all, like on their own, they're on an overnight batch basis, and take multiple days to settle. They don't interact with each other. And so if you're exchanging one asset for another, like that's like an operational nightmare unless you invest in bespoke technology to connect them. But in our case, like here, we're bringing all of these assets. It doesn't matter if you're born on chain or if you were, tokenized on chain from like a legacy system, you're all in the same operating system. And basically, you're able to program unique experiences. Like you're able to essentially like, have the Lego blocks, if you will, of, taking assets, taking waterfalls and programming them at the scale that you can to build like software.
Let me ask you one thing on this. So let's say I'm a 70-year-old manager of a private credit fund who's worked on Wall Street for 40 years. And I'm like, Lego blocks, like interoperability.
So ageist.
Well, the reason I asked this is because last week, I was talking to a 70-year-old manager of a private credit fund, and I was talking about kind of using the language I think that Christine is using, and he said, "I have zero clue what you're talking about." He said, "You know what I want? I want more people investing in my fund."
Yeah, so I was just kind of talking through like why tokenization or what you get from tokenization, but why at Apollo we're tokenizing our funds. We're really focused on expanding access to private markets. As we mentioned, as I mentioned, we're in the business of generating excess spread per unit of risk. This is alpha that we generate that for our investors that have historically just been the domain of large sovereign wealth funds and institutions. And now we're focused on expanding this alpha generation for a broader audience that are not necessarily sovereign wealth funds and pension funds, et cetera. And significantly, I'm focused on reaching the next generation of investors that very clearly is crypto native and wants to have a total diversified portfolio on chain. And so, part of this also is like a discovery on, like this, like anyone that you speak to that is like of this generation, they are quickly growing to become like the future leaders of the world. They will also inherit wealth as well as create their own. The way they invest is not the same way as the way our parents invested or our grandparents invested. Their first investment was probably Bitcoin and like, some NFT and like some altcoin, right? I'm not going to use any profane language, right? So like they have no preconceived notions of what are the markets. And in fact, they, are drawn to the crypto markets. So, like to net it, I would say that like the reason why tokenization is compelling is we're learning about the next generation of investors. We're modifying and, evolving our products to, kind of accommodate that. And then more significantly, expanding people's ability to access alpha generation.
Jano, one thing I would add to, you could say to a 70-year-old asset manager that wants to increase their AUM is that one way you could increase your AUM is if you could produce higher returns, right? It's pretty obvious. So if you have a credit fund and your credit fund is returning 8 to 10%, and there is a mechanism that investors can access the credit fund and then lever it to go to 15, 20%, they will actually generate more AUM for you because leverage means you're going to borrow money to invest more in your fund. So, and you can actually see it with the first strategy we deploy. We have X amount of millions of dollars in the credit fund, and that went up by X% because by levering, we have to purchase more of the same asset. That's how you actually increase the yield, right? So that increases the AUM. Now, the question is, how do you actually do that efficiently and safely, right? And if you were in traditional finance, it would be like a complete nightmare. So you will have to go to this 70-year-old person. You will have to talk to the investment manager or somebody in the back office of their firm. You have to say, I want to subscribe to this fund. It will take you like 2 weeks to get the subscription process and settle the trade done. Then you're going to find somebody that wants to lend you money against the asset. Then once you find that person, it's going to take another 2 weeks for them to send you the loan back with the loan papers and the cash in the bank. Then you have to go back to the same 70-year-old asset manager and say, I want to resubscribe to your fund for 80% of the previous amount because I got more dollars, and it's going to take another 2 weeks. Then you have to go back to the lender, another 2 weeks, and and then you have to figure out how to manage all these positions in a way that if you need to liquidate them, you can actually do it in an efficient way, which might not even be feasible because maybe the liquidity profile of the asset is not there, or you cannot unwind the loans quickly because they're all paper-based, they're not automated, etc. So I think
I was going to say, one day I'm going to be a 70-year-old asset manager. Will you keep me current?
I shouldn't have said the 70-year-old part. I'm regretting that already.
What we need to do, to your point about, is this for crypto native or is for everybody? Well, today is for crypto native because you have to be a crypto native to interact. But the same way that we're taking, crypto native stuff like Bitcoin and creating ETFs that anybody can access to, there is a world where you take these structured products that you can create with, people like Gauntlet and Morpho and us, etc., and then you repackage it in a way that a TradFi person can just click a button and boom, invest, and then be invested on that particular strategy that somebody else is managing for them. Yeah. So, and then you don't need to understand crypto, because I think if what we're building in crypto is only for crypto natives that know how to use wallets and smart contracts and stuff like that, it's not going to scale, right? So you need to use the technology, but then you need to repackage it in a way that you abstract out the complexity of the technology.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is, like, if I were talking to the 70-year-old, I would say two things. One is, how hard is it for you to get LP and GP loans? Like, how hard is it for your LPs to borrow against their positions and finance themselves, maybe to commit to your next fund, maybe to invest in another investment? Generally speaking, LP and GP loans are kind of a pain in the ass. And Carlos kind of gave you the reason. A, there's a legal document at every step. B, there's sort of like a waiting time in between. It's not, oftentimes you can't subscribe whenever you want. There's not this kind of like continuous thing where it's like, hey, I want to give you another $1. I want to redeem 50 cents. I want to give you another $10. you can't really do this kind of like back and forth. And then I think the third thing that's really important is that credit quality and credit standards are very different in traditional finance versus on-chain. I think in general, lending against LP stakes is a very established business in traditional finance, but it's kind of one where, generally speaking, I think the risk premium is extremely high because you're forcing the lender to take this kind of very high duration risk. And usually it's a single lender. So usually you can't pool together many lenders. And I think one really important thing about the crypto aspect here is in crypto, you basically, when you think about the kind of vehicles for doing this, and maybe I'm front running your questions, like vaults, they're effectively creating SPVs for a particular strategy, and I think like in some ways that makes it a lot easier than in traditional finance, where it's like, oh, I have to figure out like what legal entity has to own this thing in order for me to borrow against it, and oh, does that legal entity exist somewhere where I have to think about the tax considerations more efficiently, and like I think there's a lot of stuff that these kind of on-chain kind of vehicles actually do a lot better that people are probably not thinking about.